Hello, my name is Father Emery DE Gaal. I'm Chairman and Professor of Systematic Theology at the University of St. Mary of the Lake, Mundelein Seminary.
And Father, I wanted to ask you about how the pontificates of Benedict and John Paul work together. You could talk about that.
So Hans-Urs von Balthasar, one of the great theologians of the past 20th century, said, "Truth is symphonic." And this we see in the pontificates of Blessed John Paul II and of Pope Benedict XVI very well exemplified. Providence had John Paul II become an eminent Thomist scholar. It was his mentor, Cardinal Sapieha of Krakow, who wanted him to study under Garrigou-Lagrange here at the Angelicum, over on the other side of the Tiber River, maybe 3-4 kilometers away. On the other hand, Pope Benedict, as a small seminarian Ratzinger, went into the seminary after the harrowing experiences of World War II, and the Thomism he was taught there did not speak to him. It did not speak to the man who had experienced aerial bombardment, infantry attacks, mines, and several months of prisoner of war imprisonment. But it was not the Thomas of Thomas Aquinas of the 13th century. It was the Thomas of neo-scholasticism that was arid, unhistorical, impersonal, and abstract, that did not convince him, however much he was aware that this teaching was capable of asserting forcefully the intellectual superiority of Catholic faith and its intelligibility to everyone. And so this led him to discover Augustine, Bonaventure, and also John Henry Newman. Now, there are two trajectories in intellectual life, in theological life. We have the line from Plato via Augustine, Anselm of Canterbury, Bonaventure, and John Henry Newman, all the way to Benedict. This we call the Illuminatist trajectory, and to this Pope Benedict, is firmly allied. On the other hand, we have the trajectory reaching back to Aristotle via Thomas Aquinas and Albert the Great, via the Spanish Baroque scholastics Suarez, Vittoria, then here in Italy, Cajetan, going all the way to Garrigou-Lagrange and into the present. Ludwig Ott can be mentioned here also, who say, apart from time, apart from a cultural flavor, truth always is intelligible and convincing. So the two men, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, are really complementing one another. We can always say that we cannot grasp the whole, but we are part of the whole. That means the whole in fragments, as Pope Benedict XVI phrases it. The temptation of Thomism, or let us say of neo-scholasticism, is to reduce everything to a self-contained system. That's what we discover with Kant and especially with Hegel. And Pope Benedict, says system is always a danger. And Thomas Aquinas himself, opposed system. So this is what demarcates and complements the two great pontificates of Blessed John Paul II and of Pope Benedict.
Usually the phenomenologists are Augustinian. How did John Paul become a phenomenologist?
Yes, he became this via his faith life, via reading Max Scheler and Edith Stein. She was a pupil of Edmund Husserl, a phenomenologist, teaching in Prague and then in Freiburg and Breisgau. She met Scheele, but she combined this with the personal faith of the Carmelites. Nevertheless, she also translated Thomas Aquinas into German, into very good German. But she understood there is a personal dimension to faith. And in contrast to German spirituality, like Angelus Silesius, Tauler, etc., she wanted a personal God. And this she found in the great theological spiritual minds of the 16th century of the Siglo d'Oro in Spain. When Spain was laden with chocolate and gold from the New World, great men and women like Ignatius of Loyola, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross discovered the great topic of world history is not accumulating wealth, not accumulating global power. The Spanish Empire controlled all parts of the world almost. No, it is my relationship to the personal, more specifically to the tri-personal God. And that makes all the difference. And that justifies my existence here on earth and grants me eternal future.
Why do you think Benedict's writings, I noticed in his homilies and things, he really seemed to capture things so well, you know, the spirit of the world and also, of course, the spirit of the gospel. He seemed to really speak to my heart, I heard. Why is that? Why was that? Because you think, I thought even more so than John Paul. John Paul was the great pastor who spent so much time with people. Benedict's often thought more of the academic. But I thought Benedict had a wonderful way of speaking to the heart. Why do you think that is?
Father Mark, that's a very important point. In the 1950s, after having earned his doctorate degree here from the Angelicum and his terminal degree, the habilitation from Lublin Catholic University in Poland, it was very difficult as an average faithful to understand the Bishop Karol Wojtyła in Polish. It was too difficult for the average person, and this would only improve in the 1960s and 70s. He was really in love with philosophy. He was in love with a disciplined way of thinking. Pope Benedict comes from a different situation. He was born in 1927. That is 9 years after Germany had lost World War I. The Baroque and ornate language of the Wilhelmic era no longer spoke to people. It was considered hollow. The Weimar Republic, that is between the Emperor and the Third Reich in 1933, tried to discover an authentic self in the person. Handwriting became simplified. Language became less ornate. And as a result, the style of language became different. If we want to look at Pope Benedict's German, we have to look at men who were formed at that time. That is, at Hans Karossa, an author and doctor who wrote beautiful literature, and at Romano Guardini, who, while erudite, intelligent, and professor, nevertheless spoke in such a way that the youth in Germany, Neues Deutschland, Quickborn, these youth movements, were fascinated and searched for a new way of expressing our faith. That's what liturgical renewal is all about. There must be an agreement between my persona, the horizon of my language and thoughts, and our faith. And this is what Josef Ratzinger, achieves by using a beautiful but never beguiling language. As a result, sometimes his books were first published not in German, but in Italian or even Korean, because it is so easy or relatively easy to understand. And yet, And that's the genius of Pope Benedict. He never cheapens our faith.
Do you think the scripture scholarship out of Germany, did that help form this language too, this new way of speaking?
I believe this is true, yes. Yes, this did influence him also. He discovered in scripture, with the help of scripture scholars, a personal relationship between the text and himself. And this is why he now promotes the Lectio Divina.
Do you think too, I never thought about losing World War I, but also like the presence of Nazism in Germany, would that be formative for him in terms of having this very powerful experience of the depravity of man, maybe making
Yes.
it more Augustinian? That I know in Poland you had the concentration camps on their soil, but it wasn't done by the Polish people. Benedict
Yes.
saw, in a sense, even though they weren't Bavarian, but he saw the Nazis do these atrocities. Do
Yeah.
you think that really shaped him in looking at how he viewed man?
Yes. For the Polish mind, as well as for all of the Slavs, to think intellectually, to think in matters of in terms of philosophy, is an act of freedom. It's an act of defiance against matter, against totalitarianism, against National Socialism. So in contrast to Pope John Paul II, who is an intellectual and thereby defies materialism in the form of communism or National Socialism, Pope Benedict is influenced by Romano Guardini. And Romano Guardini says, after the triad, emperor, home country, and church collapsed, we have to discover where our true identity lies. And he says, that's the realm of the church. And he says something like the following: Das Erwachen der Kirche in den Seelen der Menschen, the awakening of the church in the souls of men, of people. This must occur. So we do not trust any longer in an institution, in a nation. What we trust in is the realm of Jesus Christ, the church as the elongation of the continuation of the incarnation, that we as human beings become conscious and authentic members of this body of Jesus Christ. This is the great agenda and the point of departure also for Pope Benedict. And so he's fascinated with this book by Romano Guardini, in German called Der Herr, in English, the Lord. A beautiful multi-series meditations on Jesus Christ.